The Christmas tree in town square stood tall for everyone to look in awe. The vibrant reds and blues and yellows and greens coiled around the towering like a colorful snake. Children tightly clutched the hands of their mothers and fathers and grinned with crooked teeth at the masterful display of holidays. Its light cast onto the empty buildings and lonely streets, emptied the man and woman by the men and women standing around to speculate. In the wake of the cheerful holiday smiles came across another surprise. Snow began to fall from the sky, dressing the streets in a glowing blanket of sparkling white, heavier than flurry, not yet quite a storm. Children stuck their tongues out with flustered cheeks, giggling with myriad snowflakes that melted on them. And for that moment in the bitter cold, it seemed that through the world revolved only around that tree that stood right in front of them. But there it was, of course, the one and only family within a small town who had dedicatedly rejected to invitation to be around the others. At last the woman was much more content, sitting idly on her chair and waiting for the information regarding her husband. She had told her child that he had been out working in the last few days, trying to best to recover up the fact that he had in fact gone missing. Now with 4 days gone by and had nothing else to show for it, all she could do was stare intently at the static of the television and neglect the wilting Christmas tree. The woman barely grasped at the half-empty bottle of vodka in her hand when she heard the pitter-patter of soft feet. She instinctively leaned, placed in the shadows beside her. Her gaze fell upon a small boy that sprinted into the living room, waving a tiny turquoise blanket back and forth. "Mommy!" His shrill voice cut through the buzz she had acquired from the alcohol. She winced. "There's a man with a badge at the door. He says he wants to talk to you." Her daze was immediately broken when she sat upright on the chair, staring at him with a furious rage in her eyes. "You opened the door?" she scolded. The boy just stared at her for a moment before looking down, only to be met back with hands across the face. He stepped back, grabbing his reddening face in tears, brimming in his eyes as she stood up, inhaling sharply. "I told you to tell me first when someone knocks." She sighed of exasperation, stumbling out of the living room and hugging the wall for balance as she moved to the front door to open a crack. Deep in the background, she could hear Frosty the Snowman playing in the boy's room. She shooed her child away, opening the door up enough for her face to be seen. A police officer stood in the snow. Fingers in the hoops of his belt had greeted her with a grin. She met his grin with a deep frown. "What are you doing here so late?" Her voice slurred, causing the officer's expression to waver. "Your husband." His voice was deep but soft in his expression. "We've learned a bit more about where he might be." Her expression was almost immediately changed. She stepped back, opening the door fully. The officer stepped in, raking his feet across the welcome carpet as a blast of cold burst into the warm home. She closed the door quickly, shuddering from the bitter weather. Further down the lonely streets, there was only movement in the dark shadows besides the buildings, broken lampposts. A figure walked through the darkness, as if it was their home. The hood on his fervor feeling and lit the person's face from view from the naked eye. The being walked slowly as if savoring the bitter cold, surrounded them with pitch-black boots, left prints in the thin blanket of snow. The figure began to speak, with the voice of a delicate man, and it was a whisper, with the softness of an unfurling lullaby. However, there was a clear mild voice within its undertone. The soft noise sung at the slow pace. "It's the most wonderful time of the year." Nobody was around to hear the man's enchanting voice. However, he seemed to enjoy the solitude surrounding him. Under his arm, he cradled a large cardboard box, wrapped hazardously with a variety of different papers. A substance dribbled from the bottom of the corner of the box and into the snow. although the hue was unseen in the darkness. With the kids jingle belling, and everyone was telling you, be good of cheer. The Shadow Man suddenly subjected the dim spectrum of a barely functioning light streetlight. Pitch black eyes sparkled against the brightness of his pale and shrunken face was shown. However, the visual was only granted for a brief moment as he continued to his troll. A droplet of crimson red sunk into the blanket of white as he passed by the streetlight. He looked forward onto the police cruiser, parked in front of the home that he had been traversing through the snow to find. A small grin formed on his features. His soft feet cracked against the snowy sidewalk with the purpose that he had tried his best to be within the darkness. Inching closer to the home, eventually he stood in front of the dreary yet moderately lit up building, and at that point he walked up to the tree concrete stairs, continuously singing to himself, "It's the most wonderful time of the year." He placed the box down at the top step, adjusting the large ribbon that had been placed onto it. He stood up with a grin growing from ear to ear as the light washed over his face. A large and jagged scar ran down from just beside his eye, all the way down to the lower jawline. He lifted his clenched fist up, rapping it on the door with a few times. He waited for a moment before turning around quickly, sinking back into the shadows before the door was opened. The woman had taken her place back to the reclining chair. The officer stood awkwardly as he explained the current situation to her, purposely ignoring the stench of alcohol in her breath and darting his gaze away from her half-closed eyes. She pushed a bottle of vodka back behind the chair as she listened intently as she could hear to the man. She nodded slowly. "So, you found his car?" The officer solemnly nodded, granting another faint smile. "Yes, on the outskirts of this town hidden in the trees." He looked away from her fully and now glanced at the white Christmas tree that he had shed so much of the pine needles due to its malnourishment. "We don't know why it's there or where he ran off to, but it's a start. They have the canine unit sniffing for any abnormal scent right now." The wife took a solace in knowledge that her husband was possibly being okay better than the uncertainty that she had been facing. As if on cue, the little boy ran out into the living room once again, particularly jumping from the balls of his feet. "I heard a knock, Mommy." She sat up with a sigh. "I didn't open the door this time, Mommy, I promise." She pushed past him and walked down the hallway with the police officer behind her. She opened the door with a crack first, checking to see if anyone was actually there. She saw no person, but a large gift was placed on their doorstep. With a raised eyebrow, she opened the door, glancing at the various different wrapping papers used to unwrap around the outside of the box. The officer eyed the present closely before his expression changed. Great concern was washed over him, stepped in front of her with a nervous chuckle. "Let me open it first. It's probably some pranksters again." He stepped outside and took out the box cutter, getting into his knees, and as he drew in a breath. This wasn't the fault of any teenage pranksters. He had been in the force all long enough to know what exactly it was. With great caution, he took the ribbon off and tossed it aside, pressing the blade onto the wrapping paper, and through the top of the box. He ran the knife across until he was able to open the top with ease. As he opened it, he drew back quickly, covering his mouth as he fought the urge to vomit. The present had been worse than he imagined it to be. Curiously, the wife looked inside and her expression distorted into shock when she let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed across the darkened sky. She hugged the wall as the little boy ran off to the noise. "Mommy, what's wrong?" But she didn't respond. She simply fell into her knees as she sobbed into her hands. The boy placed a small hand onto her shoulder. "Mommy?" The child moved to its glance and take the contents of the present. However, the officer stood up quickly and covered the boy's eyes, drawing him back, and he stared inside the box in terror. Inside the box was a severed head, submerged to the chin down to its pool of blood. The man's head had been matted with substance, and his eyes were wide, almost alive with terror. His mouth hung open, and his face was riddled with cuts and bruises. A scar ran down just from the right of his eye, all the way down to across its cheek to its lower jawline. At the top of his head was a Santa hat, tainted with droplets of blood. The officer pushed the child back to his mother, who held on to her with a confused expression on his face. The officer barely stood on his shaky legs, holding a ripped piece of wrapping paper and staring at it. It seemed to be the legends were true. In fact, he stared at the sticker that had been stuck to the wrapping paper, a still image of Santa waving his mitten to the person looking. To the fortunate family, from Cirrus Nightshade, I am here. And that, my little pretties, was Red Christmas, Red Christmas creepypasta written by Kain Coffey. My final thoughts on the story. Now, before I get to this, this story was also written by, well, Cirrus Nightshade. So I'm just gonna call it Cirrus Nightshade. I know it was written by Kain Coffey, but Cirrus Nightshade is like another name I could definitely state. Now, what did I think of this story? I didn't think this story was that bad, actually. I don't think this story was even bad at all. In fact, I actually found this one to be quite an interesting concept for the story. I mean, I like it, and I'm not gonna lie, it was definitely something. Like when I first saw this story, it definitely has a pretty interesting concept for what this really was. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, the story of its own self seemed pretty good. Like, I mean, the grammar was really good as well as the sentence structuring, the storyline. I mean, it's pretty good, so pretty good. Like, I mean, I did hear this story from not a lot of people had narrated this story, surprisingly. Well, I think Pumpkin Queen actually narrated this one as well. I could be wrong, however. Well, because there's two versions of Red Christmas. One of them being one that Dave the Useless narrated, which was a short one. I mean, there's a few creepypastas based on this. Oh yeah. And Dr. Moxmo Readings also narrated this story as well. But I think I might consider checking out his narration because I already checked out Macabre Sanity narration of this. So, okay. What did I have to say? Well, I mean, most of the grammar was pretty good. Like, the correct capitalization was pretty good and all that. But I will have to say, there were a couple of grammatical errors, like some minor grammatical errors partway through. So, like, there was a few run-on sentences, but I mean, the story wasn't that terrible. It was pretty good for what this was. So, I'm not going to deny that. I mean, it does have a pretty good concept for what it is. I mean, there were some punctuation errors in the story and some grammatical errors as well. So, there's that. The originality of this story, I mean, it comes up as a simple vehicle to introduce your OC, but I'm gonna say there was some parts of this story that didn't really have, much to it. I mean, one of them being that, we don't really have too much of a backstory with, the woman or the cop or even the kid. But Cirrus Nightshade pop character to me is just, I don't really know, actually, to be honest. I mean, we're not given much background about this, whatever this creature was that left a present on this mother's doorstep. I mean, there's like barely anything, explained there on that note. And another one is, the only scare of the story would be revealed the head of the box, which is predictable. But I mean, the description of Nightshade was decent. It could have had, but there was no build up to the actions before we seen him. since there was nothing really, I did see nothing trying to connect him to the missing man. I mean, if there was more of a better connection to the missing man and all that, then maybe the creepiness would have been more, well, believable in a sense. But in this case, I think it just not really, well, it just didn't make any sense. And I think what would have been made it better is maybe there's a better backstory with certain characters, or at least then maybe this plot line would have been more interesting, quote unquote, so to speak. I mean, if we got a better backstory on what happened and all that, and everything connected together or something, then yeah, maybe the story would be somewhat better. But unfortunately, with that being said, I mean, the story just didn't really. I just don't really know. I mean, maybe there was more of a better background description or something. Then yeah, I would have to say the story wasn't too bad or anything. I mean, the story was written by Kain Coffey, so I want to say to Kain Coffey, this story was amazing. I mean, there were some things that do need to be improvements on in the story, but other than that, it was not terrible. It was a pretty good story. I'm not denying that now. It was a very well made story. There's definitely a lot of time and effort. I really do find this one to be, enjoyable. Although this story could have like a little bit of improvement, but you know, not bad story. I'm gonna be too honest. I mean, I could understand maybe the person was, focused on the creepy factor rather than the plot itself. But, I mean, making this being a prologue to a saga or something would maybe be helpful. I mean, it's not a bad pasta, but it does need work. So, that's just me. Maybe you guys might have your own different opinion on this story, because, yeah, well, with that being the case, and that being said, like I'm gonna say right now, this is just simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions regards to these creepypastas, and this is my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this story would have to be a. I'm gonna give this one a Pardon me about that. I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10. It was a scratch 7 out of 10. I'm gonna give this one a 6 out of 10. It's not a bad creepypasta. It did have an interesting concept for what it is. Grammar was pretty good, although the sentence structuring does need to be worked on a bit, and I did spot some grammatical errors in the story. But other than that, I mean, it's not a bad story. It does need some improvement, but other than that, the story was not too bad. I mean, it could be a little bit more improvement, but not a terrible story. So I definitely say that it's a good pasta, but could have been better. But anyways, what did you guys think about this curry pasta? Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better? Feel free to leave me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode, and if you're new to my channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload, so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.